Welcome back to movementprofessional.com. Today we're going to deconstruct the press. So we have three different apparatuses here that we're going to look at: the barbell, the dumbbell, and the kettlebell. And you can do a strict press with all three apparatuses. Pretty much the same mechanics, just there's slightly different mobility demands because of the different holds that you have to take with the apparatus. So we're going to start by just looking at the press with no apparatus or no resistance whatsoever, and just kind of break it down into the beginning position, the finishing position, and then also understanding that throughout the whole movement there is a midline stabilization. So that's kind of where we have to start. Alright, so if we look at the pelvis here from the front, we got the two hip bones, the pubic bone, that's going to be flat. Right? We've talked about this in other videos. I mean, that's pretty standard. You know, that's where we want to keep it. So from the side, we don't want this overextension in the lower back with the belly pushing out. We want just a nice flat table through here. Okay, we can have the glutes on a little bit. I like to spin my feet into the ground. Depending on how heavy the weight is, I'll do a bit more of it or a bit less of it, depending on how much tension I need in the body. All right, but just that external rotation created in the hips turns the glutes on, but it also tends to help me kind of posteriorly rotate my pelvis into a more neutral position. All right, so from there, we're looking at the front rack position, all right, which in general, so looking at it from the front, we want the elbow pretty close under the wrist, and depending on the apparatus, we actually may want that elbow inside the wrist a little bit. When we get into the barbell, we're going to actually need to go inside the wrist a little bit with the elbow in order to create the front rack shelf so that our shoulders are in a little bit of an externally rotated position as opposed to being tipped forward into an internally rotated position. Alright, so that's key. So you're really trying to create this torque into external rotation all the time, but depending on the apparatus, you may not need to be any further than just neutral and be able to rest it close to your body. Alright, so the main thing with any type of body mechanics are when you're lifting weight, the farther the weight is away from your body, the heavier it is. So distance equals resistance, basically. So if I have a weight that's out here, I'm already working harder in my shoulder, I'm already in balance to a forward shoulder. So the more I can pull it into the body without overextending, maintaining this stability here, the better it's going to be for the shoulder. The lighter the weight's actually going to be too, so it's going to be more efficient. I'll be able to lift heavier weight because I'm not working hard against the forces of physics. Alright, so I'm going to stay tight in here. And then when we go up into the press, the transition, alright, is going to be, again, trying to stay in these good planes of the body, so staying close. The more we press out in front, the more we're isolating or kind of putting the front muscles of the shoulder and the chest on an island. You're not giving them any assistance from the stabilizers of the shoulder and the rear muscles of the shoulder. So we want to try to create an arc where we stay in this frontal plane of the body. So the frontal plane would be, you draw a straight line down from my ear down to the ankle bone. Alright, so I want to try to do my best to stay in this frontal plane of the body as I press up. And then I want to get to my overhead position, which again, my ear, if you're looking from the side, the arm makes the ear disappear pretty much. I don't want to be too far out in front, again, because now the resistance is basically pushing down against my hand here, and now I have to use my shoulder a lot more, as opposed to just being in this line of gravity. It kind of loads right into the shoulder joint, so it's a much more stable position for the shoulder. Same thing if I go too far back, now I'm overstretching. Most people don't have the mobility to go back there, but for the hypermobile individuals, might be way out here and you're thinking, all right, that's a more stable position, but now you're hanging out on the ligaments more than you should. So we want to be right in the line of gravity. We have to do less work to keep it here. All right, so with mobility issues, there's going to be a difficulty to get into this position. So if that is unattainable, then mobility has to be worked on before we can really get into any type of real pressing with resistance. All right, so we're going up here, and then at the top, you've got to have this thumb turned back, where you're trying to promote this type of motion where the thumb turns back. So depending on the apparatus, you may not actually be able to get your thumbs back, but if you can do so, and if you can't, create pressure on the bar so that you're trying to turn the thumb back. All right, and that's where you're finishing. All right, so this overhead position here is as much of a stability exercise as something like a prone plank or the top of a push-up. things that are traditionally thought of as core stability work. The same goes for just hanging out overhead with your arm here. If I keep my core stable, I'm going to be in a nice straight line, fingertips down to the ankle. If not, I'm here. All right? Or there's some type of compensation that's going to be made. So if I'm standing like this, I'm not stable. If I'm standing like this, I'm very stable. All right? And I have to work to keep this stability. So a press is one of my favorite stability exercises. All right, so let's start with looking at some of the different apparatuses and different grips that we have to take. So kettlebell is one of my favorites. All right, one of the reasons is, one, it's got a handle, but the front rack position here is kind of like loads the shoulder down. So the weight of the kettlebell pushes the shoulder into the socket a little bit better than any of the other apparatuses. All right, there's an instability involved in having to press the kettlebell, which makes your stabilizing muscles have to work a bit harder, but it also doesn't call for a ton of wrist mobility, and it allows you to pretty easily get in this holster here with the elbow right under the wrist. All right, so I want to almost create a little bit of wrist flexion. For some people new to the kettlebell, this is going to be a little bit tough on the forearm there just to get used to that pressure. All right, but I want to get stable. All right, and I'm thinking as I'm pressing, I want to push my feet down through the ground, and that helps me keep this core stability. So I'm going to take a breath in. I'm going to push down through the ground, and again, if you look from the side, I'm going to try to create this a little bit out movement so I keep the path of the weight in this frontal plane. All right, so I'm going out a little bit and then up, and again, I'm finishing in this overhead position here. All right, so we have to see how stable you can be in this overhead position. So just hanging out here sometimes it's harder for people than doing the press. If that's the case, then you want to do some overhead walks, you want to do some overhead stands. You know, like I was saying before, just getting up here and standing and holding and keeping everything tight for isometrics, 10-second holds, 10 times. That is as much of any core stability exercise as any type of plank will ever be. And it's quite functional where you're actually working on the mobility of your shoulder with the stability of your shoulder. All right, so you bring that down. On the way down, you want to think about kind of retracing your steps. So I'm going to go elbow out in that frontal plane, and then I'm hugging the weight back in. So I'm bringing the hand and the elbow into the body without overextending. Okay? All right, so you obviously want to look at both sides, and there will be likely an asymmetry side to side. So you want to test out for that. I know my left shoulder is a bit tighter, and I'm right-handed, so the coordination, especially with the kettlebell, of getting it up there may be a bit different. And I certainly feel when I'm up here, it's a lot tighter, it's a lot harder to hold this overhead position stable. So I want to work on that stability as much as I want to work on the actual press itself. Okay? So same idea with the dumbbell. The grip I like to take on is this external rotation where I'm trying to flip the palm towards me a little bit. Again, I got the elbow in, kind of right under the wrist, and I'm having the palm face myself, trying to pull the weight in as much as I can, and then I'm coming out a little bit into this frontal plane, and then finishing with the thumb up overhead, and then pulling down as if I'm doing a pull-up, a one-arm pull-up to bring it back in tight. So we don't want to loop it back in front. We don't want to go too far behind. That could really wreak havoc on the rotator cuff. You want to keep it tight, so even though I'm moving the bell away from my body a little bit, I'm still staying tight through my shoulder blade muscles and staying in this frontal plane and bringing it then in tight. Okay, and then looking at the other side. So the only difference here with the dumbbell is just, again, the grip, that you can create a little bit more external rotation here. You don't have the weight of the kettlebell kind of pressing down as much. So I prefer to use the kettlebell, but depending on what you have, I mean, it shouldn't be that much of a different exercise. So if you don't have kettlebells and you got dumbbells, which most gyms do, even Planet Fitness has dumbbells, you can work on this press and make it pretty. And you can get a great workout in. But also, you can be working your upper body, but really think about this as a stability exercise more than anything. All right? And then with the barbell, and this is certainly the trickiest for two main reasons. One, you have to be bilateral with it. So there is going to be asymmetries from your right side to your left side. Everybody's got them. All right, so with the barbell, you have to be using both arms at the same time, and when you do that, your asymmetries are going to come into play and might make it more challenging for you to be stable. All right. So the other thing is that the front rack position, what the barbell calls for a ton of mobility in the shoulders and wrists. All right. Specifically the shoulders. Most people get trouble with their wrists doing this front rack position because it calls for a lot of extension. But the bar really shouldn't be resting on the wrist as much as it should be resting on the shelf here, so that you're able to get this flexion and shoulder external rotation where the elbow is in slightly from the wrist. So I usually take a grip that's about thumb's length, wider than there's a dash mark on most bars here. All right, and then I can get it, so I'm going to be wider than a lot of people will be narrow with a press. And what happens when you get too narrow is that your wrists are going to be inside of the elbows, and then when you're pressed, you're going to want to press out in front of you. It's going to be hard to get up here. Your starting position when your hands or wrists are inside the elbows is already in a little bit of internal rotation in the shoulder. Internal rotation in the shoulder tips the shoulder forward, creates instability right off the get-go. All right, so get a little bit wider and then create this up and in with the elbows, and then you can create this shelf. So if I take my fingers off, it's just resting there. Okay? Now with a press, I'm going to have to get my whole hand around the bar. So I squeeze it pretty tight, and then I drive the elbows up and in, and that's where my stability is. All right? So there's definitely a tendency as I drive the elbows up and in to arch my back. So I got to set this first, and nothing moves, and that's where my front rack position is. All right, then the other piece with the barbell is I got to get my face out of the way. I don't want to start out here and go in front of the face. I actually want, if I did move my face out of the way, I'd be hitting myself in the chin. So I want to tuck the chin, shave the nose, finish overhead, straight line. All right, trying to, again, break the bar, so I'm trying to get the thumbs back. So if I didn't have the bar, I'd be looking like I'd be doing that. So that's what I'm trying to do with the bar. All right, so elbows in. Get the face out of the way, and then bring the head back through the window. My arms are right in line with the ears, making a straight line. All right? So strict pressing is strength work, stability work. So when you're doing strict pressing, you don't really want to be looking to do a ton of repetitions. You want to be focusing on maybe some lower reps trying to build strength. If you are going to do higher reps, make sure that the weight is appropriate, that you don't compensate. All right? There's a lot of room for compensation when you're doing standing press work. The back's going to want to arch as you get tired. So I would really concentrate on these movements, do them slowly, and try not to do too many reps. That's going to be down the line for some other more intense movements like the push press and the push jerk. All right. Let me know if you have any questions. I'll see you next time.